The atmosphere at the Grand Central Terminal was thick with the smell of damp coats and recycled air. William Wynne, a 9-year-old retired Navy SEAL, stood like a pillar of granite amidst the rushing tides of commuters. His broad shoulders and muscular build were draped in a simple charcoal jacket, but his presence was unmistakable. With deep moss-green eyes framed by crow-esque feet, he scanned the crowd with the practiced precision of a man who had spent decades in shadows. Beside him, Smoky, a balmy Killam German Shepherd Labrador cross, sat in a perfectly upright posture. Smoky's black and tan fur was groomed to a sheen, his erect pointed ears twitching at every metallic clang of the train tracks. Suddenly, a frail hand clutched William's powerful forearm. He turned, his square-jawed face settling into a mask of professional alertness. It was an elderly woman, her eyes wide with a terror that William had seen on many battlefields. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling so violently it was barely audible. "Please pretend you re my grandson. Don't look back, just keep walking with me. They re going to kill me." William didn't hesitate. He felt the weight of her desperation. Behind her, 3 men in tactical windbreakers were cutting through the crowd, their eyes locked on the old woman capite hat predatory intent. William adjusted his grip on Smokiest leash, his salt and pepper Bayou det cut catching the overhead lights. The game was on. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. William leaned down, a gentle contrast to his rugged, sun-kissed skin and deep forehead wrinkles. "It's okay, Grandma, Moph got you. Let's get to the platform," he said, his voice a deep, reassuring rumble. He signaled Smoky capite hat a subtle shift of his weight. The intelligent dog immediately moved to the lady's other side, creating a protective barrier. As they walked, the woman whispered her name, Mrs. Gable. She wasn't just a random target. Her late husband had been a lead engineer for a top-tier defense contractor, and she was carrying a microdrive containing encrypted military tech specs her own greedy grandson had promised to sell to the highest bidder on the black market. The men following them weren't just thugs, they were professional recovery specialists. William's jaw tightened, his powerful jawline prominent as he calculated their exit. Before we continue this heart-pounding escape, if you believe in the bravery of our veterans and their loyal K9 companions, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more of these stories of courage to life. The mercenaries were closing the distance. They weren't using silencers or blades yet. They were trying to blend in, hoping to snatch Mrs. Gable in the chaos of the boarding call. William noticed the way they communicated. Short, sharp hand signals. Professionals, he thought. But they didn't know they were up against a man who had survived the Hindu Kush and the urban labyrinths of the Middle East. William looked at Smoky. The dog's dark brown eyes were fixed on the lead pursuer. Smoky didn't growl. He didn't need to. His intensity was a silent promise of violence. Mrs. Gable was shivering, her small frame leaning heavily on William's muscular arm. "They getting closer," she whimpered. William caught a glimpse of himself in a station window, a 9-year-old man with silver streaks in his black beard, looking every bit the warrior he still was. "Smoky, watch," William commanded in a low tone. K9 pivoted his rear, walking backward while facing the threats, his long, strong muzzle slightly parted. William steered Mrs. Gable toward a maintenance corridor. He knew the main exits would be watched. To save her, he had to take these men into the dark, where a SEAL does his best work. The maintenance corridor was dimly lit, smelling of oil and old concrete. It was a stark contrast to the gleaming marble of the main terminal. Mrs. Gable's breath came in ragged gasps. Mott can't go much further," she admitted. William stopped, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to. Smoky and Mott are going to handle this." He scanned the room. Crates were stacked high, creating a natural funnel. It was the perfect spot for an ambush, but not the kind the mercenaries were expecting. William's military mind was racing. He didn't want a firefight, too much heart risk to the lady and the tech. He needed to neutralize them with precision. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, high-intensity tactical flashlight and a roll of industrial zip ties he always carried. He looked at Smoky, whose erect ears were tuned to the sound of footsteps approaching the heavy metal door they had just passed. "Smoky, stay and guard," William ordered. The dog took a position next to Mrs. Gable, his posture regal and intimidating. William then vanished into the shadows between the crates, his salt and pepper hair blending into the gloom, leaving the mercenaries to walk into a trap set by a master of the craft. The heavy metal door creaked open. Two of the men entered, their movement synchronized. They held high-voltage tasers, clearly intending to incapacitate the woman and her grandson quickly. They saw Smoky first. The dog stood his ground, his intelligent dark brown eyes reflecting the dim light, a silent sentinel guarding the trembling Mrs. Gable. "Just give us the bag, lady, and the dog does to get hurt," one of the men hissed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He didn't see William. Moving with the silence of a ghost, William emerged from the shadows behind the second man. With a swift, non-lethal strike to the brachial plexus, William sent the man crashing to his knees, his nervous system temporarily overloaded. Before the first mercenary could react, William used the man's own momentum to disarm him. Twisting the taser away and tossing it into a corner, William stood tall, his 9-year-old frame looking twice as large in the cramped space. His moss-green eyes were cold and focused. "You picked the wrong grandson to mess with," William said, his voice echoing with a terrifying calm. The first mercenary lunged, but William's square-jawed face didn't show a hint of fear. He was just getting started. The mercenary, a man half William's age but twice as reckless, swung a heavy fist. William didn't flinch. With the fluidity of a seasoned operator, he stepped inside the punch, his broad shoulders absorbing the impact as he redirected the attacker's energy. Using a classic joint lock, William pinned the man's arm behind his back. The mercenary gasped as his face was pressed against the cold, damp concrete wall. William didn't use a weapon. His hands, calloused from years of service, were tools enough. He reached for a heavy-duty zip tie and secured the man's wrists with a clinical efficiency that left no room for escape. Smoky remained a statue beside Mrs. Gable. His pointed ears were locked forward, tracking the sound of the third mercenary, the leader, who was still outside the door. Smoky's barkilogam frame was a wall of muscle and fur, his black and tan coat bristling slightly. He let out a low, vibrating huff, not a bark, but a warning. Mrs. Gable clutched the microdrive in her pocket, her eyes fixed on William. She saw the deep forehead wrinkles and the silver streaks in his beard, realizing this wasn't just a random stranger. This was a man who had lived 100 lives in the service of others. William signaled Smoky to move Mrs. Gable further into the shadows of the maintenance room, preparing for the arrival of the final three. The door pushed open slowly. A tall man in a tailored tactical coat stepped in. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a shadow. This was Miller, the lead contractor hired by Mrs. Gable's grandson. He saw his partner pinned to the wall and the other unconscious in the corner. Miller's eyes met William's moss-green ones. For a moment there was a silent acknowledgement between two professionals. "You Wynne, aren't you?" Miller asked, his voice smooth and dangerous. "The legend from the SEAL teams. Mort thought you were retired, living the quiet life with your..." William stood his ground, his muscular build casting a long shadow. "Retirement is a relative term," William replied, his voice a low, gravelly warning. "The lady is under my protection. You can walk away now, or you can find out why they call me the ghost of the Hindu Kush." Miller chuckled, a cold, dry sound. He knew the value of the tech Mrs. Gable held, billions in defense contracts. He was going to walk away. He reached into his coat, but before he could pull anything out, William whistled. It was a loud sound, but to Smoky, it was a launch command. The German Shepherd Labrador cross didn't attack the throat. He launched himself at Miller's arm, his intelligent brown eyes focused on the objective. Smoky moved like a blur of black and tan. His Labrador agility combined with Shepherd strength allowed him to leap from a standstill, his powerful muzzle clamping down on Miller's forearm just as the man drew a high-output flashbang. Smoky didn't bite to maul, he bit to hold. The weight of the barkilogam dog pulled Miller off balance, sending the flashbang skittering across the floor. Miller yelled in frustration, trying to shake the dog off, but Smoky's grip was like iron, his upright posture maintaining his center of gravity. "Smoky, hold," William commanded as he moved in. Mrs. Gable watched in awe as the dog worked in perfect harmony with the man. William didn't strike Miller. Instead, he used a pressure point behind the ear to drop the mercenary to his knees. As Miller slumped, William recovered the flashbang and secured it. He then patted Smoky's head, a brief but warm good boy that made the dog's tail give a single sharp wag. They had neutralized the immediate threat, but William knew the terminal was crawling with more of Miller's team. He needed to get Mrs. Gable to the surface, and he needed to do it through the maze of the underground service tunnels. The service tunnels were a graveyard of rusted pipes and hissing steam. William led the way, his moss-green eyes scanning the darkness for movement. He moved with a slight crouch, his broad shoulders brushing against the narrow walls. Mrs. Gable followed closely, holding onto the back of William's jacket. Smoky acted as the rear guard, his erect ears swiveling much-amtami degrees to catch any sound of pursuit. The air was thick with the smell of wet soot, and the only light came from the occasional flickering bulb overhead. "Why are you doing this for me?" Mrs. Gable whispered, her voice echoing softly. William paused, looking back at her. The rugged texture of his sun-kissed skin softened for a moment. "Because people like your grandson think they can take whatever they want from those who built this world," he said quietly. "And because Smoky likes you." The dog nudged Mrs. Gable's hand with his long muzzle, a gesture of comfort that brought a small smile to her tired face. But the moment was short-lived. Above them they heard the heavy thud of boots on the metal grates. The rest of the mercenary team had found the service entrance. They were trapped in the tunnels, and the only way out was up through the ventilation shaft. William reached the base of a vertical iron ladder that led to a street-level grate. It was a steep climb, and he knew Mrs. Gable couldn't do it alone. He looked at Smoky, then at the lady. "Mort Met going to carry you," Williams said, his square-jawed face set in grim determination. He used his belt and a spare strap to create a makeshift harness, securing Mrs. Gable to his broad back. "Smoky Scout," he ordered. The dog looked at the ladder, then at a series of stacked crates nearby. With an incredible display of athleticism, Smoky leaped from crate to crate, reaching a ledge halfway up the shaft. As William began the grueling climb, the sound of the mercenaries entering the tunnel grew louder. He could see their flashlight beams dancing on the walls below, every muscle in his 9-year-old frame strained, his powerful jawline tight with effort. He was a veteran, a warrior, and a protector, and he would not let this woman fall. He reached the ledge where Smoky was waiting, the dog's dark brown eyes watching the darkness below with predatory focus. They were almost to the sunlight, almost to safety. The tension is at a breaking point. Will William and Smoky make it to the street before the mercenaries catch up? If you're rooting for this incredible duo, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a chapter of this pulse-pounding story. Your support keeps the mission going. The top of the ventilation shaft was sealed by a heavy iron grate, rusted shut by decades of neglect. William reached the top rung, his muscles burning from the weight of Mrs. Gable on his back. Through the slits of the grate he could see the grey, overcast sky of the city. He looked down. The flashlight beams of the pursuers were getting uncomfortably close. He had no time for finesse. William braced his broad shoulders against the metal frame, his moss-green eyes narrowing in focus. With a grunt of pure, concentrated power he surged upward. The rust groaned, then snapped with a sharp metallic crack. William shoved the grate aside and hauled himself onto the wet pavement of a narrow alleyway. He quickly unstrapped Mrs. Gable, helping her to her feet with a steady hand. "You redoing great, Ma'am. Just a little further," he encouraged, his rugged face etched with a calm confidence. Smoky was right behind them, leaping out of the hole with effortless grace, his black and tan fur slightly damp from the condensation in the shaft. The dog immediately took a defensive stance, his long muzzle sniffing the air. He sensed the city's chaos, but his focus remained entirely on William. They were out of the tunnels, but in the open streets, they were more visible than ever. William knew the mercenaries would have vehicles patrolling the perimeter. They needed to move, and they needed to move fast. Rain began to fall in a light, misty drizzle, slicking the cobblestones of the old district. William led Mrs. Gable through a maze of back streets, his military buzz cut, collecting droplets of water. He utilized every shadow, every dumpster, and every parked car as cover. His 9-year-old instincts were in high gear. He kept not just walking, he was navigating a combat zone. He kept his hand on Smoky's harness, the dog walking in a perfect heeled position, his erect ears swiveling toward the sound of every distant siren or screeching tire. "We need to get off the main grid," William whispered, his square jaw set. "They'll be tracking cell towers and traffic cams." He looked at Mrs. Gable, noticing her shivering. He took off his charcoal jacket, revealing the powerful physique of his salt and pepper arms, and draped it over her shoulders. "Keep your head down," he advised. He spotted an old nondescript laundromat at the end of the block, a perfect place to blend in and plan their next move. Smoky led the way, his intelligent dark brown eyes scanning the glass storefronts. The dog was more than a pet, he was a biological radar system, and right now he was telling William that the hunters were closing the circle. Inside the laundromat, the air was warm and smelled of soap and heat. Mrs. Gable sat on a plastic bench, clutching William's jacket around her. William stood by the window, his deep forehead wrinkles prominent as he watched a black SUV crawl slowly past the entrance. He turned to Mrs. Gable. "That drive you recarrying, it's more than just tech, isn't it?" he asked quietly. She looked up, her eyes filling with tears. "It's a biometric encryption key," she confessed. "My husband designed it to protect the nation's most sensitive communication satellites. My grandson, Marcus, in debt to some very bad people, he thinks he can sell the key to erase his mistakes." William felt a surge of cold anger. He had seen many types of betrayal in his career, but a man selling out his own flesh and blood for a gamble was a new low. He knelt in front of her, his moss-green eyes radiating a fierce sincerity. "My team and Mort spent our lives protecting what your husband built. Mort meant not letting Marcus or his hired guns touch this." Smoky sensed the shift in William's energy and rested his heavy head on Mrs. Gable's knee, offering a silent comfort that only a dog could provide. The bond between the three of them was no longer a ruse, it was a pact of protection. William knew the SUV would be back. He needed a distraction, and he knew just how to create one. William spotted a pile of discarded laundry bags in the corner. He quickly began stuffing them with old newspapers and heavy detergent bottles to mimic the shape of a human. He looked at Smoky. "Hey boy, you ready for a little run?" Smoky let out a soft, eager woof, his tail thumping once against the floor. William attached a long, thin cord to one of the bags and threaded it through the back exit of the laundromat. He was setting a ghost trail. While Mrs. Gable stayed hidden in the back storage room, William and Smoky worked in tandem. William rigged the back door to swing open when the cord was pulled from a distance. As the black SUV pulled into the alley behind the building, William signaled Smoky. The dog grabbed the end of the cord in his strong muzzle and, on William's mark, darted across the alley toward a stack of pallets. To the mercenaries in the SUV, it looked like someone had just bolted out the door. The vehicle accelerated, tires spinning on the wet asphalt, following the ghost toward the dead end of the alley. William watched from the shadows, his salt and pepper beard twitching into a grim smile. The distraction worked. They had bought themselves 10 minutes of lead time. With the mercenaries occupied in the alley, William ushered Mrs. Gable out the front door and toward a pedestrian bridge that spanned the nearby canal. The bridge was narrow and poorly lit, a perfect choke point. As they reached the center, William stopped. His moss-green eyes caught a glint of metal on the far side. Another team was waiting for them. They were sandwiched, mercenaries behind them and a blockade in front. William looked down at the dark, churning water of the canal below. It wasn't an easy drop, but it was their only chance to disappear. He checked the straps on Smoky's tactical harness. "Smoky, anchor," he commanded. The dog dug his paws into the metal grating of the bridge, providing a solid point of stability. William gripped the railing, his muscular build tensing as he prepared to lower Mrs. Gable down to a maintenance ledge just above the waterline. "Trust me," he whispered to her. Just then, the sound of heavy boots echoed from both ends of the bridge. The mercenaries were closing in, their tactical lights cutting through the rain. William stood tall, his square-jawed face defiant. He had one more trick up his sleeve, but it would require Smoky to take the biggest leap of his life. The flashlights of the mercenaries were like searching fingers of white light, cutting through the misty rain. William looked at Mrs. Gable, then at the churning dark water below. "Mort needs you to hold on to me like your life depends on it, because it does," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. He secured the lady to his chest using a tactical rappelling line he had pulled from his gear bag. His moss-green eyes then turned to Smoky. The dog was alert, his blackened and ferret undeterred. "Smoky, over!" Without a second of hesitation, Smoky vaulted over the railing. To a normal dog, the 15-foot drop would be terrifying, but Smoky was trained for air insertions. He landed on a narrow maintenance catwalk just above the water with the grace of a cat. William followed immediately, using his powerful arm strength to control their descent along a thick drainage pipe. They hit the catwalk just as a hail of non-lethal shock rounds sparked against the metal railing above. The mercenaries peered over the edge, but William and his team had already vanished into the shadows of the bridge under structure. The 9-year-old SEAL's heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear but from the thrill of the mission. The catwalk was slippery with algae and river spray. William moved with measured steps, his broad shoulders hunched to keep Mrs. Gable low. Smoky led the way, his erect ears catching the echoes of the mercenaries shouting above. The dog's upright posture was gone, replaced by a low-profile tactical crawl. He was a shadow moving through shadows. Mrs. Gable was silent, her face pale, but she saw the way William handled the situation with a calm, square-jawed determination that made her feel safe for the first time in days. "We can stay on the water," William whispered. They luglunked bring in boats with thermal scanners. He spotted a rusty access hatch that led into the city's old steam tunnel network. It was a gamble. Those tunnels were often dead ends, but William's memory of the city's blueprints, studied years ago for a different mission, began to resurface. He wiped the rain from his forehead, his deep wrinkles catching the dim light. He pried the hatch open with a low groan of metal. Smoky squeezed through first, his intelligent dark brown eyes scanning the interior for threats. One by one they slipped into the belly of the city, leaving the rain and the hunters behind. Deep within the steam tunnels they found a small, abandoned technician's room. It was dry and hidden behind a heavy pressurized door. William finally let Mrs. Gable down. He immediately checked her for injuries, his large calloused hands surprisingly gentle. "You're safe for now, Mrs. Gable," he reassured her. He then turned to Smoky, who was shaking the water off his coat. William gave the dog a firm pat on the ribs, a job well done. As they sat in the dim glow of a single emergency light, Mrs. Gable pulled the microdrive from her pocket. "My husband always said that the most dangerous weapon is a gun. It's information," she said softly. William nodded, his salt and pepper beard casting a shadow on the wall. He was right, and right now you're the most important person in this city. He took out a small satellite phone. He didn't call the police. He knew the grandson likely had them on the payroll. He called his old unit's logistics officer. He needed an extraction, but he knew he couldn't get it until he neutralized the lead mercenary, Miller, who was likely tracking the driver's passive signal. While they waited, William's phone intercepted a local radio frequency. It was Marcus, the grandson. His voice was filled with a mix of desperation and greed. "Mott don't care if she is my grandmother. If she want to give it up, take it by force. Just get me that drive before the buyers leave the city." William's moss-green eyes turned to ice. He looked at Mrs. Gable, who had heard every word. The heartbreak on her face was palpable. "Mort met's so sorry, William," she whispered. "I raised him better than this." William knelt beside her, his powerful jawline tight. "This is ton, you ma'am. Some people choose the darkness, no matter how much light you show them." Smoky let out a low, protective growl, his dark brown eyes fixed on the door. He could sense William's anger. The SEAL K9 kept that Miller and his men were close. They had a signal tracking device. Instead of hiding, William decided it was time to set a trap that would end this pursuit once and for all. He began to look around the room for materials. A Navy SEAL doesn't need a rifle to win, he needs an edge. William's military mind was working at light speed. He used copper wiring from the walls, some old steam valves and the high-output flashbang he had taken from Miller earlier. He was building a non-lethal deterrent system in the narrow corridor leading to their room. He looked at Smoky. Smoky, distract. The dog knew the drill. He would be the bait, drawing the mercenaries into the kill zone where the steam valves would create a blinding, deafening curtain of heat and noise. As the sound of footsteps echoed in the tunnel, William moved Mrs. Gable behind a heavy iron desk. He stood in the center of the room, his muscular frame silhouetted by the flickering light. He looked every bit the legendary warrior Miller feared. The door hissed as it began to open. William took a deep breath, his moss-green eyes focused and deadly. This wasn't just about a microdrive anymore. It was about justice for a woman betrayed by her own blood. "Showtime, Smoky," William whispered. The dog let out a sharp, commanding bark, and the final confrontation began. The heavy pressurized door groaned as the mercenaries forced it open. Miller's men poured in, their tactical lights cutting through the darkness. But William was ready. As the lead man stepped over the threshold, William yanked the copper wire he had rigged. A series of ancient steam valves hissed violently, releasing a thick, blinding curtain of white vapor. The corridor was instantly transformed into a sweltering, opaque labyrinth. The mercenaries shouted in confusion, their flashlights reflecting uselessly off the dense mist. Now Smoky. William's voice was a sharp, low command. Smoky, the Bamaki-Logan black and tan powerhouse, did need to see. He used his keen sense of smell and hearing. He moved through the steam like a phantom, his erect ears pinpointing the location of the intruders. He didn't bark, he used his weight to topple the lead mercenary, slamming his shoulder into the man's knees. As the man fell, William emerged from the fog. His moss-green eyes were focused, his square-jawed face a mask of cold efficiency. With 2 swift, non-lethal strikes to the solar plexus, William neutralized the first 2 threats before they could even level their tasers. The SEAL-S, salt and pepper hair, was damp with steam, but his movements were as precise as a clockwork mechanism. The third mercenary swung wildly with a telescopic baton, the metal whistling through the steam. William stepped back, his broad shoulders clearing the arc of the weapon by an inch. He didn't counter with a strike. He grabbed the man's wrist, applying a high-pressure joint lock that sent the baton clattering to the concrete floor. With a fluid motion, William pivoted, using his muscular build to throw the attacker into the iron wall. The man slumped over, unconscious but alive. William's sun-kissed skin was slick with sweat, but his breathing remained rhythmic and controlled. Smoky stood guard at the edge of the steam curtain, his intelligent dark brown eyes watching for any movement from the doorway. His upright posture was a silent warning. Mrs. Gable sat behind the iron desk, her hands over her ears, but when she looked up she saw William standing there, a 9-year-old warrior who looked like a titan in the mist. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a shield. "Stay down, Mrs. Gable," William said, his voice a reassuring rumble. "The leader is still out there, and he's not coming alone." William adjusted his grip on a heavy industrial wrench he had picked up, his powerful jawline tight with anticipation. The steam began to dissipate, revealing Miller standing at Mott for the end of the corridor. He was alone. Beside him stood Marcus, Mrs. Gable's grandson. Marcus looked out of place in his expensive Italian suit, his face twisted in a mixture of fear and greed. "Just give them the drive, Grandma," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. "They won't let you go. Mort just need the money to clear my debts. Why do you have to be so difficult?" William stepped forward, his moss-green eyes locked on Miller, ignoring the whining grants. The deep crow's feet around his eyes crinkled as he evaluated the situation. Miller was holding a remote detonator. "Mott V rigged the main steam line," Miller said, his voice cold. "Give us the drive or Mott blow this entire section. We all go down together." William didn't blink. He knew the type. Miller was a mercenary. He wanted a payday, not a suicide pact. "You re-bluffing, Miller," William said, his black and silver beard twitching. "You want to get paid if the drive is buried under 10 tons of rubble. And Smoky here does like threats." Smoky let out a low guttural growl, his black and tan fur bristling along his spine. Mrs. Gable stood up from behind the desk, her frail legs shaking. She looked at Marcus, the boy she had once baked cookies for, the man who was now willing to kill her for a digital key. "Marcus," she said, her voice stronger than William expected, "your grandfather built that technology to save lives, not to fund your failures. Mott would have given you everything I had, but Mott will never give you this." Marcus' face turned a shade of ugly purple. "Then you useless to me," he spat. He turned to Miller. "Do it! Take it from her!" Miller hesitated, his finger hovering over the button. He was a professional, and even he seemed disgusted by Marcus' cowardice. William saw the opening. He didn't attack Miller. He looked at Smoky and gave a silent hand signal, the command for disarm. Smoky launched himself not at Miller, but at the hand holding the detonator. The dog's long, strong muzzle closed around Miller's wrist with surgical precision. The remote fell to the floor, and William moved in like a lightning strike. William closed the distance in 3 massive strides. Before Miller could recover, William's muscular arm wrapped around the mercenary's neck in a non-lethal sleeper hold. Miller struggled, but William's broad shoulders were like a vice. Within seconds, the mercenary went limp. William gently lowered him to the ground, securing the detonator. He then turned his attention to Marcus, who was backing away toward the door, his eyes wide with terror. You can touch me," Marcus stammered. "Mott won't tell the police you kidnapped her." William stood tall, the deep forehead wrinkles on his face etched with a look of pure disdain. He didn't need to say a word. Smoky walked over to Marcus, his erect ears pointed and his dark brown eyes fixed on the man's throat. The dog didn't move, but the threat was clear. One wrong move and Marcus would find out exactly what a Bamaki-Logan K9 could do. "The police are already on their way, Marcus," William said, holding up his satellite phone. "And Mott have a recording of everything you just said." Your debt is about to be the least of your problems. The transition from the hunter to the hunted was complete. Marcus was cornered against the cold, damp wall of the steam tunnel. His expensive suit was ruined, stained by the soot of the underground, a perfect reflection of his crumbling life. "William, listen to me," he begged, his voice trembling as he looked into William S. moss-green eyes. "Mott can give you half. Whatever they were paying Miller, double it. A veteran. You deserve a retirement that doesn't involve living in shadows." William didn't move. He stood with his broad shoulders squared, the deep crow's feet around his eyes tightening in a look of profound disgust. Beside him, Smoky was a statue of black and tan fur. The dog's intelligent dark brown eyes never left Marcus. Smoky didn't need a command to know that this man was the true threat, not because of his strength, but because of his lack of honor. William finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that echoed off the metal pipes. "You think everyone has a price because you sold yours a long time ago, but some things, Marcus, are priceless. Loyalty, honor, and the safety of a woman who loved you more than you deserved." William reached out, and with one powerful, muscular hand he took the heavy bag Marcus was clutching, the one intended for the buyers. He didn't use violence, he used the sheer weight of his presence to make Marcus collapse into a heap of tears and regret. The sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed from the far end of the tunnel. It was the disorganized scramble of mercenaries, but the precise, synchronized beat of a professional extraction team. William S. satellite call had reached the right ears. A group of men in sterile, dark tactical gear emerged from the shadows, led by a man William had served Verkepi years ago. They didn't carry rifles, they carried the authority of the Department of Defense. "Commander Wynne," the lead agent said, nodding respectfully toward William's salt and pepper buzz cut. "We've secured the perimeter. The buyers were intercepted 2 blocks away." William stepped aside, allowing the team to take Miller and his unconscious men into custody. He kept a protective hand on Mrs. Gable's shoulder as Marcus was led away in handcuffs, the grandson refusing to meet her eyes. Smoky watched the scene with his erect ears twitching, his long muzzle slightly open as he panted softly. The tension that had filled the air for hours finally began to dissipate. The mission was nearly over. The military tech was safe, but more importantly, the woman who held the key to it was still standing, her dignity intact despite the betrayal she had endured. In the quiet of a secure government vehicle, Mrs. Gable finally pulled the micro-drive from the pocket of William S. charcoal jacket. She looked at it for a long time, the flickering streetlights outside the window illuminating the deep wrinkles of her own hand. She then looked at William, whose rugged, sun-kissed skin was highlighted by the moonlight. "My husband spent his life making sure our country was safe," she said softly. "Mott thought Marcus was the bridge to the future, but Mott see now that the bridge is held up by men like you, William." She handed the drive to the lead agent, but she kept her eyes on William. The agent confirmed the encryption was intact. The satellite codes were safe. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," the agent said. "And thank you, Commander. The nation owes you a debt." William simply nodded, his square-jawed face showing a hint of a humble smile. "Mott ve kepa et nert alone," William replied, looking down at Smoky. The dog was sitting in his perfectly upright posture on the floor of the van, his tail giving a soft thump-thump against the carpet. The bond between the veteran and his K9 had been the silent engine that drove them through the night, a partnership forged in duty and finished in grace. As the sun began to peek over the city's skyline, casting a golden hue over the Grand Central Terminal where it all began, William walked Mrs. Gable to the door of her home. The city was waking up, unaware of the shadow war that had been fought in its bellies and bridges just hours before. Mrs. Gable stopped at the threshold, turning to look at the man who had pretended to be her grandson to save her life. "You don't have to pretend anymore, William," she said, her voice filled with a newfound. William reached out and took her hand, his large, calloused palm a symbol of the protection he had provided. "Maybe not," William said, his moss-green eyes softening, "but that does mean I want to be checking in on you. Smoky and Mott are always in the neighborhood." Smoky stepped forward, nudging Mrs. Gable's hand with his long, strong muzzle. She reached down and scratched him behind his pointed ears, and for the first time that day, the dog let out a happy, relaxed breath. The greed of a grandson had been defeated by the heart of a stranger, a man who lived by a code that time could never erase. William, Wynne and Smoky walked away from the quiet suburban street, their silhouettes lengthening in the morning light. William S.'s broad shoulders were relaxed for the first time in 24 hours. He looked down at his loyal companion, the Bamie-kilogram German Shepherd Labrador cross that had been his eyes and ears in the dark. "Hungry, boy?" William asked. Smoky responded with a sharp, intelligent woof and a playful trot, his black and tan fur glowing in the sun. They had faced mercenaries, navigated labyrinths, and stared down betrayal, all without firing a single shot. It was a victory of character over chaos. As they headed toward the park, William felt the weight of his 50 years, but he also felt a sense of purpose that retirement could never dull. He was a Navy SEAL, a guardian, and a friend, and as long as there were people like Mrs. Gable who needed a shield, and as long as he had Smoky by his side, William Wynne would never truly be retired. The story of the grandson at the station would become a legend, but for William it was just another day on the watch.
The channel The Dog and the Veteran is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.